Panthers look to have gotten 2 regulation points until the Montreal Canadiens snatched it away from them.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Wednesday, April 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Monoman12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at @LO_FLA Panthers and on Blue Sky at LOFLA Panthers. You can follow the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Subscribe, and if you're on the YouTube channel, make sure to press that like button down below. So we are recording this the morning after the Florida Panthers lose to the Montreal Canadiens by a final score of 3-2 in overtime, where the Panthers were slow out of the gate in the first period, barely getting shots on net. And then for the Florida Panthers, just like Sunday, they controlled play through the final 39 minutes and 52 seconds. And then the Montreal Canadiens came up the ice, and with the Panthers' inability to stop them at the blue line, get a game-time goal with 8.2 seconds left by Nick Suzuki, and then 29 seconds into overtime, Nick Suzuki scores the game-winning goal, overtime winner, on a wraparound where the Florida Panthers did not touch the puck once during that overtime period. And here to break all that down with me is Jacob Winans here on a Winans Wednesday edition of the show. And Jacob, I don't know if you ever watched the show on Nickelodeon, Dora the Explorer, when you were younger, but this felt like that one time that Swiper the Fox decided to not listen to Dora and Boots, and he decided to swipe away what the opposition was telling him not to swipe. And watching the show growing up, 9 times out of 10 he said "old man" and then just ran away. But this felt like one of those times in the case of the Florida Panthers and a hockey perspective, that the Panthers had it with them, and it just in heartbreaking fashion, just a few lapses, one lapse especially, that ended up in the back of their net. And then we thought that the Panthers were going to have the regulation win and only 1 point out of it. And the Panthers are unable to clinch their spot in the postseason and now have fallen even more behind in the division race. So welcome to the show, my friend. And this was hard to swallow.
Yeah, any way you slice it, that's just a bad loss. We've had some time to sit on it and think about it a little bit, recording this morning instead of last night, but it hasn't really changed how I feel about that one. It's a bad loss. I understand people giving the team the benefit of the doubt. I understand the injury issues, the guys that are out of the lineup, and then guys who are still in the lineup dealing with things. Barkov he left the bench for some time last night. Sam Bennett in the past couple of games has had a couple of trips to the dressing room during games and come back. So it's fair to reason the guys are dealing with some things right now, and health might not be 100%. We know we got a lot of guys out of the lineup, but with that said, if you're serious about contending for the division, that's a loss you can't have. And at the end of the day, it's also just a disturbing trend. It's a team that has kind of made their whole identity keeping leads. They're not a team that tends to blow other teams out. They tend to get a 1 or 2 goal lead, and then that lead is usually safe. In the past month, they've blown a bunch of them. It's a disturbing trend. It's not what you want to look like come playoff time. You assume the games are going to be close and tight in the playoffs. They always are. And if you got 1 goal leads, you have to be able to protect those. And right now, it's not a team that's playing confidently to win games. It's like they're playing not to lose games. And when you do that, you you end up getting burned. So I understand, like, unlucky bounce. It's unfortunate how it happens, but it doesn't have to get to that point. There's just a lack of aggression, serious lack of offense right now, and yeah, I'm just, it's a really bad loss. Any way you look at it, it's a terrible loss.
Yeah, and you mentioned Barkov going out of this one. Nico Sturm also went out in this one, just only 32 seconds of total time on ice due to friendly fire from AJ Greer, and then all the line shuffles that the Panthers had to do in this one, where you saw Brad Marchand take a shift on the top line from Sam Bennett at one point had two different line mates. I mean, two guys that he's played with before, in Carter Hagee and Evan Rodriguez. But I mean, credit to the Panthers for not taking too many men on the ice penalty for them throughout this, with all the shuffles for them in this one. But still, I mean, an icing call where Sam Montembeault had to go back into this crease, and then the Panthers was what they've done in the playoffs with just pinning it in there in along the boards, and then just unable to keep it there, and then just speed coming up the ice. And to think that for Montreal, no odd man rushes against in the first 40 minutes for them, and the Panthers were starting to play just a style of hockey. The good news is that it's not, none of these games that they're playing are resulting in them being blown out. It's close games, and sometimes I look at process over results, but at the same time for this, I mean, you're coming out on the losing end more often than not in these last 2.5 to 3 weeks here. And like I said earlier, the Panthers at the beginning were just not getting those high to low plays and those high danger shots, and just constantly missing the net, and then started to wake up. And then you think about it for them. I mean, the defense, I thought, Jones had a great game. I thought he was outstanding on that one penalty kill when Sam Bennett went to the box. Nate Schmidt with a big slide to break up a 2-on-1 for him. And then how hostile this was, with Nico Mikkola hearing all the boos from the crowd and then ending up on the score sheet for them. And then the Panthers, with how they managed the speed of Montreal, almost, and before that Nick Suzuki goal, the one that tied the game, almost 8 minutes without a shot. And you kind of like the process here, but it's just like, man, is it a trend, which is looking like it is? Is that going to be something that's going to continue on into the playoffs? Thankfully, there's no 3-on-3 hockey, but the Panthers have actually been great at 3-on-3. They're 4-3 right before last night. But at the same time, like, how I'm worried that this is something that would carry over later on.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is the Panthers really struggling to match the intensity of hungry teams right now.
Yeah,
especially in late game situations. That's kind of been their entire identity, is getting leads and holding on to them, and they carried that through the entire playoffs last season. If the Panthers got a lead, especially going into a third period, they were in really good shape. I mean, you just look at Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. That's an explosive Edmonton Oilers team, and the Panthers held a 1-goal lead for the entire way to close out that game, which is tough to do, but that's what they were about last season. Right now, I'm not seeing that same ability, and it's concerning, because if you can't match the intensity of hungry teams right now, teams are 1,000% more hungry in the playoffs, because every game in the playoffs is life or death. It's do or die. So if you blow a lead in the playoffs, that could be the difference in a home ice swinging back. That could be the difference in either a 3-1 series lead or a 2-2 series tie. That could be the difference in forcing a Game 7 or going home in 6. It's those small little things that turn into huge issues come playoff time if you don't nip this in the bud right away. It's a trend that it definitely looks like a trend, but it's one that can't continue if you're serious about winning again. So there's that part of it, and then there's I definitely hear what you're saying about process over results, and I see a lot of people comparing it to last year. Panthers, I believe if I saw this correctly, had the same record through March that they had last season.
4-5-1.
4-5-1. Last March, we had a lot of the same discussions, but we also found out around this time last year that there was a horrible stomach bug that went through the entire dressing room, and guys were sick and playing sick, and people were gassed, just trying to bounce back from that virus. And I don't think that's the same lightning strike hitting twice. I think this year it's a little different. Yes, the record's the same, but this year seems a little more self-inflicted. Yes, we've got injuries, we've got guys out of the lineup, but this isn't a situation where guys are physically incapable of playing well because of something out of their control, like a bad sickness. This is lack of attention to detail. It's lack of effort, and it's a real struggle right now for this team to match the intensity of their opponents, because everyone's playing hungry, and the Panthers just don't seem to be able to get up to that level right now.
Good news is that at least we saw a great performance out of Mackie Samoskevich, continuously getting his shots. The power play goal was without Barkov on the ice, but again, it's really comes down to just focus and just keeping it there throughout the closing time, and just one missed assignment ends up in the back of their net. And hey, credit to the Habs for getting the 2 points, coming back, and Lane Hutson continues to be outstanding. Passes Chris Chelios for the most points by a defenseman to start their career with the Habs, and man, I hate that he's in the Panthers division for years to come, and he's definitely has a case for the Calder Trophy. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss our 3 duds of the game and the moment where we knew the game was lost. We're going to discuss that all next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. And looking for a snack that's both nutritious and delicious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, give you 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keeping fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab-and-go snack for busy days. Whether I'm snacking at my desk on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost, they're always my go-to. If you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Get snacking and cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Once again, get snacking and cracking with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Segment 2 here on this Wednesday, April 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Wednesday, where the Florida Panthers are coming off a 3-2 overtime loss against the Montreal Canadiens, where now it's a season sweep for the Canadiens over the Panthers. And never thought I would say this coming into this year, Jacobs. So when it comes to our 3 duds of the game, I want to say this before I list the duds. I don't think there was necessarily I don't necessarily think these guys had a overall poor game. It's just more like bad moments for them when it came to what happened on the night. Because right before Nick Suzuki scored, I was starting to think of my 3 stars of the game, and then all of a sudden had to flip that from stars to duds. So number 3 dud, I'm going to say with Seth Jones unable to separate the puck from Hutson on that quick rush. But again, I do think that Seth Jones did not play his worst game with the Florida Panthers. I do think that he's really growing with the team really well for what he's asked to do. Sam Reinhart, number 2, the positioning that allowed it to get to Suzuki to begin with, when the puck went off him and then going into the open net. And then number 1, Vitek Vanecek is number 1 on this one, and he saved the Panthers' bacon quite a few times. There was one where Uvis Balinskis lost Cole Caulfield in the neutral zone, and then a quick rush, and then while the Panthers were on a power play, Nate Schmidt broke his stick, and then he had to save him for as well off a quick rush for him. But I mean that read off of Nick Suzuki 29 seconds into overtime, that can't happen for him, and just a poor read there, and then just unable to get back to his post to his right where Nick Suzuki scored the game winner, and it was quick. The Panthers never possessed the puck, which they usually do during 3-on-3 overtime and all that open ice. But we are seeing the next step into the Montreal Canadiens rebuild, and just they're no longer in the basement, which means this is really one team to truly take seriously here. So your 3 duds of the game for this one, Jacob.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to put Seth Jones on my list. He definitely had a really bad moment, sort of lapse in judgment. If you watch that play, these things happen so quickly, but
yeah,
takes a stab at the puck and almost gets it out.
Almost.
And that's the first play, but I'd like to see him, when he sees that puck not get out of the zone, just retreat right away. But he goes for a second stab at the puck, and it allows Hutson to flick it past him towards the net. So it's one bad decision, but overall, I think he had a pretty good game.
Absolutely, I agree.
That's sort of my honorable mention. My third is going to be Sam Reinhart. That's just a bad decision. And it's odd from Reinhart, because he's usually so responsible and one of if not the smartest player on the team. It's between him and Barkov, hands down. You don't really see him make a mistake like that, but it's a floating point shot that should be relatively easy for Vanecek to handle on his own. He can kill the play if he gets it. There's really no reason to get in front of the goalie and try to block that. I don't necessarily know why he did it. And it sort of reminds me of the game at home against Boston earlier in the year, where the Panthers really should have won that game. Reinhart gets a pretty lucky break, tying it, sending it to overtime, and then has a horribly unlucky bounce trying to block a shot in overtime, and Pasternak wins the game against the now last place Bruins, by the way. Place Bruins. That's fun to say. But that was a tough break for Reinhart. Number 2 dud for me is Vanecek. Like you said, he had some really good saves, but closing the game out is important, and nothing he could do on the game tying goal. I can't fault him for that. But in overtime, it's just a misplay. I mean, hugging the post for a second too long, and then not pushing off the post to get back across. He reacted late to Suzuki wrapping around. That's got to be the second Suzuki gets past that post, he needs to be darting to the other side. And if Suzuki tries to stop on a dime and come back, then that's when you got to trust your forward who's tracking him. And I think it was Reinhart who was tracking Suzuki at that time. Reinhart's not going to get beat going back the opposite way when he was already trailing the play. He's in perfect position. So Vanecek needs to dart to the other side of the post, and he did it late. It's a bad play. Number 1 dud for me is not someone who necessarily had a bad play. It's just another bad game, another invisible game. It's Carter Verhaeghe. I mean, we've talked about him being snake bitten and not being able to score, but he's now seriously looking at not having even 20 goals this season. His game seems a little bit lost right now to me, and it doesn't really seem to matter who his line mates are. He was on with Barkov and Reinhart to start the game, gets demoted down to the second line, doesn't produce anything there. I'm at a point now where maybe you put him back with Lundell on the third. He had a little bit of a hot streak this season playing on the Lundell line. I don't know. But you've got to start getting some offense out of Carter Verhaeghe. That's probably my biggest concern heading into the playoffs right now with this current group is what version of Carter Verhaeghe are we going to get in the playoffs? Because he's been so clutch, and the Panthers don't win a thing in the playoffs without him. But his game, it hasn't really looked this bad at any point in his tenure with the Panthers, which on one hand gives me hope that he'll bounce back. But on the other hand, that's a lot of term and a lot of money committed to him. We need to see a turnaround at some point here, and he could make it all worth it by having a good playoffs. I want to see some sort of positive progression, positive trends heading into the playoffs, and I'm just not seeing it right now.
And there is a possibility of that because, Matthew Tkachuk coming back into the lineup on game 1 of the playoffs, you're thinking that we're going to see the rat line form. And then you think that Mackie Samoskiewicz's floor would be a lot higher if he's on the Barkov line along with Sam Reinhart. And then, hey, a hot streak for him when he was with Lundell's line, that could possibly be something that could create a little bit of magic. I mean, the thing is for him, he plays on the left side. Do you put him on on that right side on that line when he's so used to playing on the left, where that's Eetu-Luostarinian's spot. And I'm gonna assume that Jesper Boquist would be the scratch in this situation because Erod has more of that flexibility to go up and down as like a Swiss Army knife for him. But I just hope that when it comes to Carter Verhaeghe, that could be he's the guy who's the speedster and the guy who could work more of that off puck. And the thing is, for the Panthers, there's less of that north-south game. So I do believe that if they do get the matchups, that if they're forced to dump the puck into the zone, which we saw a lot in that first period, which the Panthers were unable to go into the zone easily, and then it was just like not clean entries for them. So hopefully that works out for Carter Verhaeghe if he's on that line.
Yeah, definitely. And it's right now, just with the injuries, the guys in and out of the lineup, there's a little bit of a lack of flexibility at the moment until Tkachuk is back, especially now if Nico Sturm misses time. I would be shocked if he plays tonight against Toronto. You have to assume it looked like a head injury. You got to assume protocol and all that. So with those guys in and out right now, it's tough to move guys and experiment too much. You want to have something that you can carry into the playoffs. So it's a tricky spot they're in with Verhaeghe. I definitely don't see him at any point becoming a healthy scratch. I don't think it's lack of effort. I agree. It's lack of production. It's not lack of effort. Maybe a little bit of a lack of confidence, which he doesn't usually lack confidence or get gun shy at all when it comes to shooting the puck. But we saw a little bit of a showing of that from him, which surprised me. In that Canadiens game, he has a one-on-one if he turns against Sam Montembeault, if he turns and puts the puck on his forehand, but he drops it off to Reinhart, which Rhino buries that most times. Montembeault made an incredible save, but it surprised me a little bit. I'm like, yeah, that's usually a shot Verhaeghe's taking. He's not a guy who's usually passing that off, and maybe a little bit of a lack of confidence in his game at the moment. But if healthy, the Panthers have options at forward, and Verhaeghe probably becomes the guy who's most flexible to move around if you can find something to get him going. He can play anywhere from line 1 to 3, and I think that they will find a spot in the lineup for him heading into the playoffs where he can produce. You'd like to see the dam break before the playoffs a little bit. Just give us something that makes us a little more confident in his production, and then give him something that sort of gets the monkey off his back before we get into the biggest games.
No doubt. Quickly, before we transition, moment where we knew the game was lost. I thought the Panthers were still going to pull it off in overtime, but that wraparound really told me, that was the moment we saw. I didn't want to believe it until the very end, because I really thought the Panthers had victory on their side, especially in regulation. So that was when I thought the game was lost.
Yep, mine's quick too. Thought the game was lost when Suzuki tied it. At that point, you're on the road. All the momentum in the world is with Montreal. They're playing for something right now, trying to get into the playoffs. Just seemed like one of those moments in sports where nothing you're going to do is going to stop them from getting the win at that point. Luck was on their side, momentum on their side. Momentum is real. It is real. So.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, the Panthers will have to bounce back, and thankfully that's a good thing, which they won't have to think about this loss for long. So we'll transition to that and discuss more of the hot takes from our listeners. We are going to discuss that more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO giving you the visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. Segment 3 here on this Wednesday, April 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And yeah, Paul Maurice after the game did say that it's just one unlucky break for them. He's not going to be worried about it. And also he did not give an update on Nico Sturm, and we'll know later today. So Paul Maurice is going to discuss with the media about 2.5 hours before puck drop. And the thing is, the Panthers are going to be on the national stage in Canada. It's Rogers Wednesday Night Hockey over there. So the Maple Leafs are welcoming in the Stanley Cup champions on this day, and the whole nation of up north of the border is going to be watching this in a slide where the Panthers are currently on. So that's the and the thing is tonight, Jacob, the Panthers have no clinching scenarios tonight. Even if they win in regulation, even if the Rangers lose, the Panthers cannot clinch a playoff spot tonight, and they can't even pass Toronto in the division standings. So that's the tough part about this, Jacob. So yeah, I put out a tweet saying, "Hey, well, any questions or hot takes, we will read them on the show." And for this one, there's a few of them. One by Sasha Barkey said the Panthers had the same record being 4-5-1 at this point this season, last season. So hot take, but maybe we could cook and win the Atlantic and possibly do repeat again? ? And to that, I say, like, it's funny because we didn't even expect the Panthers to go on that run, winning 4 straight home games and then Boston slipping. It's gonna, and I mentioned the strength of schedule for Tampa Bay and no back-to-backs. It's like they're playing every other day from here on until the rest, while the Panthers finish early on that Tuesday. The fact is that you're chasing 2 teams, not one. That's the part that's difficult about this. So when you hear that, what do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly possible, especially the second part of that. Of course, it's possible they could repeat. Depends on the health of Matthew Tkachuk. Depends on what the D looks like when you get Kulikov back in, because we haven't had a real look at the Panthers' defense at full strength. And people forget last year in the playoffs, they had an extraordinarily rare run of health, especially on defense. Obviously, they played some games in the playoffs without Sam Bennett. He got hurt, came back, played with what was presumably a broken hand or wrist.
Ryan Lomberg got sick.
Ryan Lomberg was out for some time, but on defense, they were able to play the same defense the entire playoffs.
Yeah,
that is incredibly rare. That does not happen very often for a Stanley Cup winning team. A lot of it depends on the health of the defense and the health of Matthew Tkachuk. We'll see what that looks like. So it is certainly possible they could repeat. As far as winning the division, it looks really unlikely to me.
I agree.
It's not last year's team. It's not a team that has shown me all the signs of getting better at the right time. But it's also just not a team that's going to be healthy before the playoffs. We're not getting Tkachuk back until the playoffs. We're not getting Aaron Ekblad back until Game 3 of the playoffs. So it's not a team that's going to get healthy at the right time necessarily either. So I don't see us winning the division. At this point, I'm just hoping we get to the playoffs as healthy as possible and then let the chips fall where they may in the first round.
Yeah, and the thing is, they're 5th in the conference, so even if they do get to a conference final, you're thinking that there's a possibility that they could start every series on the road, and we know that's a little bit of a tough task for them if that were to happen. But another take from someone is J_VMS. Why is everyone blaming everything on Jones? ? According to the stat cards, he was our best player tonight. There's people blaming the tying goal on him when it was an unlucky bounce off of Reinhart that caused it. I honestly don't think he's as bad as everyone thinks he has, which I agree. There, Drewby Doo. What's up, Drew? Saying doesn't matter who and where this team plays at the end of the month, they know what they have to do. And so next one is Savici. We should have won. Another characteristic defensive letdown at third, but we're missing three key players plus Sturm. We'll be fine. Time to hide. Rude Deck says just be healthy in round 1. Don't really care if we play Toronto, Ottawa, or Tampa. Just hoping we don't see Montreal if we get past the first round, close quote. And I actually quote tweeted that saying, I will actually still, if the Panthers face the Canadiens, which doesn't look like they will, I will give the Panthers still that series, because there were still certain parts that I liked about the game where, just like Sunday, there was a long period of time where the Panthers suppressed shots against them. And if that is a long period of time throughout the playoffs, and then you give everything's even ground, even if they go to overtime, where it's all just winner take all, sudden death, I would still like the Panthers. Yeah, the Habs have guys like Jake Evans, Joel Armia, even the youngsters in Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki, who's been to a Stanley Cup final. I will give the Panthers the advantage there in a 4-game series, even with a sweep. So those last three,
No doubt. Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. So I'll start with the Jones one. I think both things can be true. Had a great game, was the Panthers' best player yesterday. Also made a really poor decision that ends up costing them an extra point. It's okay. It happens. He's definitely not been bad. He's elevated the power play, even with Matthew Tkachuk out. I'm excited to see what it looks like with Tkachuk back in and Jones running it. I think he's going to be an absolute monster in a second pair role when he can pair up with Mikkola, and then you've got Forsling and Ekblad back together. I think Seth Jones is going to be a fantastic addition to the team. He was great yesterday. He's improved every game he's played. Made a really bad decision, and I'm not gonna beat him up for it. It happens. It's a split-second decision, and it's unlucky. As far as the Panthers being fine and they know what they need to do, I agree with that too. I think they have all the ingredients. It's not an inexperienced team. They're going to be all right when they get to the playoffs. It's just the matchups matter. Starting on the road is tough, especially when you're starting on the road without Ekblad, and presumably you're looking at starting on the road either in Tampa or in Toronto if things continue the way they are. Those are two teams that have really lethal power plays. So starting on the road without your best penalty killing defenseman in either of those buildings could be really, really challenging. But the goal becomes just steal one, take home ice back, and then you get Ekblad back for game 3. You're in a good position. So it's not the end of the world. It's just not ideal. But we have seen the Panthers start every playoff game or every playoff series on the road and make it all the way to the Stanley Cup final. It's not an unfamiliar position. And I will say the Panthers' style of play travels. They're a team very, very capable of stealing huge games in other buildings. They did it in Boston, and they've ended the series in Boston 2 years in a row. They have on the road. They've stolen big games in Tampa. They've stolen big games in Toronto in the past couple of playoffs. They've stolen games in Edmonton. Carolina. These are not easy buildings to play in, and they've won road games. And the pivotal game in the Rangers series in Madison Square Garden with all the lights in the world shining down on you. They've played well in road buildings, so I'm not concerned about playing on the road. Let me think. What was the next one? We had
there was one, doesn't matter who or where they play, they know what to do. There was that pick from Drew. There was another one, the uncharacteristic breakdown in the third, but we're missing 3 key players. And
right. So, okay. So I think I covered all those. And then the last one was Montreal. Yeah. So I think any of the playoff opponents are tough. I understand you probably want to avoid a team that has a lot of playoff experience like Toronto or Tampa, but I also don't love the idea of playing the series against Ottawa. That's a hungry team. I mean, there's everyone in the playoffs. If you get to the playoffs, you're capable of winning it all. That's just a fact. Anyone who gets in yes, there's flawed teams, but if you're in the playoffs, you're there for a reason. Any of the matchups would be tough. If for some crazy reason the Panthers end up in a series against Montreal, my money's on the Panthers in 5. I mean, that's a good team. They're on the come up. But if you also look at the guys that carry that team, one, you've got Cole Caulfield, who's a great player, good scorer. He's also very small, and nothing he can do about that. But his game matched up against the Panthers in a playoff series is the most physical team in the NHL over the past couple of years. I don't know how productive he'd be. Suzuki can only do so much. The Panthers have better center depth. Sam Montembeault, you got to show me a playoff game for Sam Montembeault. He hasn't played one.
I'm with you there.
And that's a great goalie, a former Panther draft pick, a guy that I was always high on, and I'm happy to see him have some success out in Montreal, but no playoff experience. Lane Hutson, that's a rookie. Mike Matheson has played in a few playoffs, but hasn't been particularly good in any of them. It's a team with a lot of guys that are playing key roles that don't have a track record of playoff success or playoff experience. So they're not rebuilding necessarily anymore. They're on the rise, but yeah, that's not a team that I'm scared of in the playoffs. Not at all. The experience, I think, wins out.
Looking at the schedule, nothing is locked in as far as the wild card spots neither. Montreal and Ottawa play a head-to-head next Friday. And if Montreal wins that in regulation, I'm going to circle that. That's a Panthers off day. So I will definitely be tuning into that game to see if anything changes in the wild card race and possibly a change of opponent. I mean, well, the Panthers would have to win the division in order to face them to begin with, but we will see. And hopefully we'll have a different conversation tonight when the Panthers play the Maple Leafs. And hopefully we are talking about a regulation win, which the last time the Panthers won in regulation was when they visited the Leafs on March 13th. So it would only be fitting for the Panthers to break that drought tonight. And it would just be hilarious as well for that, only for it to be against the same opponent. It's crazy. A gap between road losses last year was Carolina as well. Their streak ends and then they win a few road games and then they lose again in Carolina. So it would only be fitting for the Panthers to get that again in Toronto. But Jacob, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tell everybody where they can follow you online, my friend.
Yep, you can follow me on X at Jacob Winans 8, and yeah, I guess just enjoy the big game tonight, and we got a lot of important hockey down the stretch here, so we'll just try to enjoy it, even though yesterday's really stung.
Yeah, no doubt. So thank you, Jacob, so much, and I will see you next week.
Looking forward to it. Thanks.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Jacob Winans. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.